Greenland's Doomsday Glacier is splitting in two, right now. Beneath the Arctic ice, something is happening that most people have absolutely no idea about. A glacier the size of a small country is cracking apart, and when it finally goes, it carries enough frozen water to raise every single coastline on Earth by 24 feet. Not an inch, not a few feet, 24 feet, permanently. 3 billion people live near an ocean. That includes you. And the glacier doing this, the one scientists have been watching with growing dread, is already moving faster than any glacier ever recorded in human history. But here is the part that nobody is saying out loud. The real threat is not coming from above the ice. It is coming from below it. Something is eating this glacier from the inside, and once it reaches the point of no return, there is no engineering fix, no political agreement, and no second chance. So the question is, how close are we? To understand why scientists are losing sleep over this single glacier, you first have to understand what it actually is. Not just a river of ice, not just a frozen landscape somewhere far away that has nothing to do with your life. Jakobshavn, also called Cermak-Kujalek, is the largest outlet glacier in Greenland. It is also the fastest moving glacier on the entire planet. And every single year, without pause, without slowing down, it pours 35 billion tons of ice directly into the ocean. 35 billion tons. To picture that, imagine a solid cube of ice 8 kilometers on every side. 8 kilometers tall, 8 kilometers wide, 8 kilometers deep. Now imagine that entire structure breaking apart and collapsing into the North Atlantic. Every year. That is what Jakobshavn does on a routine basis, and most people have never heard its name. The icebergs this glacier produces are not the kind you picture when someone says iceberg. Not house-sized, not building-sized. Some of them are as wide as downtown Manhattan, massive walls of ancient frozen water, 5, 10, 15 stories tall above the waterline, with most of their mass hidden beneath the surface. They drift south through the North Atlantic at varying speeds. They melt, and they push sea levels higher with every drop of cold water they release. The fjord in front of the glacier, called Ilulissat Ice Fjord, produces roughly 4% of all the icebergs in the entire northern hemisphere. 4%. One glacier, one fjord, one country, responsible for 4% of every single iceberg drifting through the northern half of the planet. When you realize that, you start to understand why researchers have been obsessively tracking this single glacier for 30 years. And what they found, over those 30 years, is what changed everything. For most of the 20th century, Jakobshavn behaved the way glaciers are supposed to behave. It moved, it calved, it lost ice at the front, and gained it from the snowpack accumulating on Greenland's interior. Slow, steady, almost completely predictable. Scientists watched it, measured it, built models around it. It was enormous, yes. It was powerful, yes. But it was stable. That stability was the baseline assumption behind every climate projection that came out of Greenland for decades. And then, in 1997, the baseline shattered. Almost overnight, the glacier stopped thickening and started thinning. The velocity began to climb. Not gradually, not over a generation of careful, incremental change. It accelerated the way a car accelerates when someone floors the gas pedal. By 2003, Jakobshavn was moving 40 meters per day. 40 meters, every single day. That is faster than any other glacier ever recorded on Earth at that time, and it kept accelerating after that. The front of the glacier, the place where ice meets ocean and icebergs break free, began retreating inland. 1 mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles inland over the following decades. Scientists watching from satellites were seeing something they had simply never prepared for. A glacier the size of a small country was coming apart in real time. Researchers like Eric Rigno at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory began pulling together satellite data and ocean temperature measurements simultaneously, trying to find the driver. What was causing this? What had changed in 1997 that hadn't been there before? The answer arrived when they looked beneath the surface. Not the surface of the ice, the surface of the water. Down in the fjord, hundreds of meters below sea level, the temperature was rising. Warm water had found its way into Ilulissat Ice Fjord, not Arctic water, which is cold and relatively stable. Atlantic water. The Erminger Sea, a branch of the broader Atlantic Ocean that wraps around the southern tip of Greenland, had begun delivering subsurface heat directly into the fjord through deep underwater channels carved into the sea floor. That warm water was flowing directly to the base of the glacier, to the exact point where the ice meets cold ocean water, and it was quietly, relentlessly melting the glacier from the inside out. This is the part that is genuinely difficult to explain without it sounding more complicated than it is. So here is the simplest version. When a glacier loses ice from the top, from surface melting, from warm summer air, from rain, it shrinks, it thins, it retreats. That is bad. But the glacier can survive it. The structure holds. The anchor holds. The glacier keeps moving toward the ocean, slower maybe, but intact. Take away the ice from the bottom, from the foundation, from the place where the glacier is gripping the seafloor and the ocean floor below it, and you are not removing ice anymore. You are removing the thing holding the whole structure together. It is the difference between shaving the top of a building down floor by floor and pulling the foundation out from underneath it. One is slow damage, the other is structural collapse. And this is exactly what was happening at Jakobshavn. By 2012, the glacier had thinned by 220 feet in some sections. The entire front face of the glacier became structurally compromised. The calving accelerated, the retreat accelerated, and scientists began to use a word they had been very careful to avoid: irreversible. But here is what nobody was saying publicly at the time. What was happening at Jakobshavn was not a local problem. It was not one glacier misbehaving in one fjord in one corner of Greenland. It was a symptom of something happening across the entire Arctic. And once you see the full picture, you realize the glacier was never really the story. The ocean was. The ocean is not supposed to be there. That is the first thing you have to understand. The deep water sitting at the base of Greenland's fjords, warm, salty Atlantic water, was never meant to reach this far north in the quantities it is now delivering. For most of recorded history, cold Arctic water sat like a lid over the warmer Atlantic water below, keeping it separated, keeping it away from the ice. A natural barrier, a thermal wall that protected the glaciers the way a thick winter coat protects you from cold. That barrier is breaking down, and the consequences are not limited to Jakobshavn. They are not limited to one fjord, or one glacier, or one country. The warm water is arriving from multiple directions simultaneously. The Erminger Current is pushing heat northward along Greenland's southern coast. The North Atlantic subpolar gyre, a massive slow-moving circulation that acts like a conveyor belt for ocean heat, has been shifting position. And as it shifts, it is funneling warm water into fjords all around Greenland's perimeter. Not one glacier, not a handful, all of them, at the same time. This is the mechanism that climate scientists have been warning about for 2 decades. Not surface melting, not warmer summers, not more rain falling on ice. The deadly mechanism is warm ocean water, delivered directly to the weakest point of every outlet glacier on the island, and systematically removing the foundation they all depend on to stay intact. This is not a weather event. It is not a season. It is an ocean-scale delivery system, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single year without interruption. Jakobshavn was the first glacier to show what this looks like at full force, but it was never going to be the last. Here is what the process actually looks like once it starts. Warm water flows into the fjord and makes contact with the glacier's face below the waterline. The ice begins to melt at the contact point. The glacier loses mass at the base faster than it can be replaced by snowfall accumulating on the interior. The glacier thins from the bottom up. As it thins, it loses buoyancy. As it loses buoyancy, the calving front, the leading edge of the glacier where icebergs break off, begins to destabilize. Icebergs calve faster, larger, more frequently. The glacier accelerates toward the ocean to compensate. As it accelerates, more ice is exposed to the warm water, which accelerates the melting, which accelerates the calving, which accelerates the retreat. Each step makes the next step worse. Scientists have a clinical name for this, a positive feedback loop. But there is nothing positive about it. It is a runaway chain reaction, and Jakobshavn proved it was not theoretical. It was real. It was already happening. And the geography makes it worse. Much worse. Beneath Jakobshavn, the seafloor does something that engineers and glaciologists describe as the worst possible configuration for a large glacier. It slopes downward as you move away from the ocean. As the glacier retreats inland, the ground beneath it gets deeper. This is called a retrograde bed slope, and what it means in practice is terrifying. Most glaciers, as they retreat, eventually find shallower ground. The water gets shallower. The calving slows down. The glacier stabilizes on a new line. It finds a new equilibrium. Jakobshavn cannot do that. As it retreats, it moves into deeper and deeper water, which means more of the glacier's face is exposed to warm ocean water, which means the melting accelerates, which means the retreat continues. There is no shallow ledge waiting inland to stop it. There is no natural break. The geometry of the bedrock beneath this glacier is designed, accidentally, perfectly, to make collapse permanent once it starts. The scale of what this means is almost impossible to hold in your mind. But try. The Greenland ice sheet holds enough water to raise global sea levels by 24 feet. That is not a prediction, it is a measurement. It is the actual volume of water frozen above sea level right now. If Jakobshavn and the other outlet glaciers it is influencing begin to fail in sequence, if the feedback loop already running at the calving front spreads to the broader ice sheet, the process that follows does not play out over centuries in a slow, manageable way. It plays out over decades. Some of the most recent modeling suggests that under certain ocean warming scenarios, irreversible ice sheet collapse could begin within a human lifetime. Within the lifetime of children alive right now, Miami would not exist in its current form. Lower Manhattan would be permanently submerged. Shanghai, the world's busiest container port, would become an inland sea. The Nile Delta, where 10 million people live, would vanish into the Mediterranean. Rotterdam, the largest port in Europe, erased. This is not a worst case from some fringe model. This is the math of what is already stored in the ice. If that landed the way it should, every subscriber is automatically entered in our monthly giveaway for a branded hoodie. Details in the description. But here is where the story takes the sharpest turn. In 2016, the glacier did something nobody expected. It slowed down. It began to grow back. The scientists watching it from satellites thought, for just a moment, that maybe the ocean had given them a reprieve. Maybe natural cycles would buy the world some time. Maybe Jakobshavn was more resilient than the data suggested. But that hope, it turned out, was the most dangerous thing they could have felt. In 2016, something shifted. The data that had been pointing in one terrifying direction for nearly 2 decades suddenly changed course. Scientists monitoring Jakobshavn from satellites noticed the glacier was slowing down. Not by a little, measurably, significantly. The velocity dropped from around 40 meters per day to something closer to 20. The calving front, which had been retreating inland for years without pause, stopped moving. Then it did something almost no one had expected. It began to advance. The glacier was growing back. And when researchers looked at the ocean temperatures inside Ilulissat ice fjord, they found the explanation. The subsurface water had cooled noticeably. The Erminger current had shifted its path. The warm Atlantic water that had been pouring heat into the base of the glacier had pulled back. Just like that, the assault stopped. The glacier began to recover. For a brief window, some researchers allowed themselves to wonder, out loud, whether natural ocean cycles might give humanity a genuine reprieve. Whether the system had more resilience than the worst projections had suggested. Whether Jakobshavn, against all odds, had stepped back from the edge. It had not. What happened in 2016 was not a recovery. It was a pause. And the difference between those two words is everything. A recovery means the underlying conditions have genuinely changed. The threat has diminished. The system is genuinely returning to a stable state. A pause means the pressure is still building, the direction has not changed, and the temporary relief is exactly that. Temporary. The fundamental driver of everything happening at Jakobshavn, the warming of the Arctic Ocean, the northward push of Atlantic heat, the slow erosion of the cold water barrier that kept warm water away from the ice for centuries, none of that reversed in 2016. The Erminger Current shifted. It will shift again. The Atlantic is still warming. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average. And the data coming out of Greenland since 2022 shows the melt is accelerating again. The ocean temperature in the fjord is rising. The glacier is thinning again. The pause is over. And this is where the story stops being about one glacier in one country and becomes something else entirely. Scientists studying the Greenland ice sheet have measured something that should stop every person reading about climate in their tracks. The fresh water pouring off Greenland into the Arctic Ocean has, since 2007, been consistently and permanently outside the range of natural variability observed across the entire 20th century. Not occasionally. Not in particularly bad years. Every single year. The melt has left the bounds of what is normal, what is natural, what the planet has experienced within living human memory. This is not a trend that might reverse with a cooler decade or a favorable ocean cycle. This is a new baseline, a new normal built on ice that is disappearing faster than it has in thousands of years. And Jakobshavn, sitting above that retrograde bed slope with no natural break waiting inland, is approaching the threshold that glaciologists have spent their careers trying to calculate. The point of no return, the moment when retreat becomes self-sustaining and unstoppable, regardless of what happens to ocean temperatures or atmospheric CO2 or any decision humans choose to make. The question is not whether that threshold exists. The science is unambiguous that it does. The question is how close the glacier already is to crossing it. We have the data. We have the measurements. We have the names of the scientists Eric Rigno, Jason Box, and hundreds of others who published the research, sounded the alarm, and described exactly what was coming long before most people were paying attention. We can measure the ice to the centimeter. We can track ocean temperatures at depth in real time. We can run the models forward and backward and sideways, and the answer keeps coming out the same. 3 billion people live within 100 kilometers of a coastline. Every major port city on Earth sits in the path of what is already locked inside that ice. The math does not care about politics. The ocean does not pause for international negotiations. The glacier does not wait for the next election cycle, or the next climate summit, or the next round of carefully worded promises that were never kept. And if stories like this remind you that the unexpected can arrive without warning, without a news alert, without time to prepare, grab your free disaster preparedness toolkit. The link is in the description. Because this is not a story with a clean ending. It is not a story where the scientists figured it out in time, and the world acted fast enough, and the ice stayed frozen, and the coastlines stayed where they were. It is a story that is still happening right now, beneath the Arctic ice, in a fjord most people will never visit, inside a glacier most people cannot pronounce. The ice does not need our attention to keep moving. It does not need us to believe in the data for the data to be true. Jakobshavn has been retreating for 30 years, whether anyone was watching or not, and it will keep retreating no matter what. The only question that actually matters now, is not what the glacier will do. We know what the glacier will do. The only question is what we choose to do in the time we still have left, before it does it. The ice will do what the ice will do. What we do next is still, for now, entirely up to us.